Hello, welcome to our virtual Justice on the Block Legal Information Clinic. This clinic is part of our virtual series, Know Your Child's Education Rights. And this session, we're going to be talking about schools and books. There's been so much media attention on school textbooks and school library books. We wanted to try and help parents understand what's really going on. My name is Stephanie Johnson. I'm the senior attorney in the Tallahassee Office of Legal Services in North Florida. And I am here with Cheryl Sadler, our education advocate with Legal Services in North Florida. And I just have a quick housekeeping note. This video provides legal information and should not be considered in any way legal advice. This video does not create an attorney-client relationship or substitute legal advice you've been given. You may have defenses that we have not discussed here, so seeking out an attorney or legal help is always advisable. And if you want any more information about us, you go to about LSNF, go to www.lsnf.org, or you can call 850-385-9007. So thank you for joining us today. And Cheryl, I'll start with my first question. Why are there so many news stories and concerns about books in schools?
That is a great question. This one goes straight back to the legislature. So in 2022, at the beginning of this year, they passed two new laws with the sexy titles of HB 1467 and HB 1557. And both of those laws have new requirements that schools have to follow. And there's right now a whole lot of confusion and not a lot of guidance.
So are these HB laws, are they about books?
HB stands for House Bill, but one is and one is not. But they intersect in really kind of interesting ways. So HB 1467 is about materials that are used in classroom instruction and materials that are in school libraries, and we usually call those media centers these days. HB 1557 is about teaching students about sexual orientation and gender identity, which, can include books. So you can see that they're smack dab, hand in glove together.
So are we talking about all books at schools?
That's a great question. And, if you read the news media, you would think that it is all books. It's not abundantly clear. So schools have tons of books, right? They're used in all kinds of different ways. The law specifically talks about two kinds of books or materials. First, library books and reading lists. So reading list is a list of books that gets sent home with your kiddo, sometimes over the summer, that they have to read. And the second is instructional materials. So most people know what a library book is and what a reading list is. Instructional materials are specifically textbooks that a district chooses to teach a specific subject. And,
Okay.
And obviously there can be other books, novels, and things that are part of the curriculum.
And so what do these laws say about library books specifically?
Right. Okay. So this gets a little complicated. There are 4 requirements. The first is that books can only be selected by a media specialist who has completed a specific training, and the training isn't available yet. And so in some districts, they have just basically put everything on hold. We're not buying any books until we know what the training is. The second is that school boards have to have a policy about how library books are to be selected so that we know the person has to be trained and then there has to be a process. And the idea of a policy, it sounds pretty fancy, but I think what the legislature wants is that it's a public thing. It's a public document that gets discussed and adopted by a school board at an open meeting, a public meeting. And the third thing, which we'll see goes right along with that, is that elementary schools have to create a searchable online list of all of their library books. And then fourth, parents or county residents can object to books.
Okay, so if a parent does object to a book, what happens?
Well, so you can object to a book on lots of different grounds, but in this case, under this law, the objection has to be that the material is not age appropriate, not developmentally appropriate, not suited to student needs or their ability to comprehend, or is pornographic. And If the school board agrees with the objection, the material is then removed. There's a lot of disagreement on what these things mean. What does it mean to be age or developmentally appropriate? And that's part of the information that schools have been waiting for since the law was signed into, since the governor signed the law. And there's groups that are actually working on those definitions right now. It's also not clear what happens if people object to a book being removed. It's not clear whether there's a process to reinstate the book.
So couldn't parents object to books previous to this law? I mean,
absolutely. Oh my goodness. In fact, and that's it's interesting that you say that. Every district has had a policy on the books for forever. I mean, parents can object to anything in a school. They can object to the content of curriculum. They can object to books in the library. They can object to a textbook. And so there's always been a process. And in fact, it's not just Florida. There have been Supreme Court cases about this. They go back to 1943, well before you or I were reading books. Book challenges, of course, are controversial because of the First Amendment, which guarantees the right of free speech. And so, it's very likely that what's happening in Florida right now is going to head for the courts. We do know that while there have been challenges for a long time, they've been getting more and more frequent. So it's becoming a larger issue.
Okay. And what does the law say specifically about instructional materials?
So to back up for a second, these laws are considered to be parental rights laws. And so particularly with instructional materials, that title is appropriate because it provides new ways for parents to be part of the process that districts use to select those books and materials. So before, districts would have a committee and the committee would review things and then they would make a decision. But now those meetings have to be open. They have to have parents as members. And they have to publish, just like they did with library books, a searchable online list of all those instructional materials. This is another new thing. Districts actually have to provide access to the materials before they vote to adopt them. And they have to say that they're going to do that on that public school board agenda. So again, you can see that they're opening up the process and saying, no, this is something that the public needs to know about and be aware of. And then, of course, you can object, and then they have to hold a hearing. So that process is specified.
Okay. So you talked about media centers. Does the law address, like, I know different classrooms have their own classroom libraries, or we also have book fairs. Does the law apply to those things too?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's hard to draw these lines, right? Schools, have books everywhere. The law doesn't say anything specifically about classroom libraries. And you're right, teachers have a bookcase in the back of the room that kids can select from when they have time. A lot of teachers provide that time specifically. And then book fairs, for those of you who haven't participated, are also typically held in the library. And that's when students come in and they buy books for themselves and then they take them home. They become part of the students' libraries. So neither one of these are instructional materials or library books. But sometimes, the deal is that schools, in return for holding the book fair, will get books. And so there may be some concern about, should they be part of the process? Do they have to be online? Do they have to be selected by this person who isn't trained yet? So, it's a little bit confusing. Classroom libraries too. Are they instructional materials? The teacher isn't teaching them, but they're available in the classroom and they're clearly part of students' learning experiences. So, we're sort of all trying to figure out where's the line.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly confusing. And I know this is like taking it really far, but what about books that kids just bring in their backpacks from home?
Absolutely. So I think we can be pretty clear here that those are not part of the law. They are not in any way considered instructional materials. And I have to say, I don't know what's in your son's backpack, but I know that most of the youth I know would have comic books or graphic novels that nobody would consider reading out loud in class. The teacher's definitely not using these to teach students.
Okay. And we've heard about in the media, like lists of banned books. I mean, are these accurate? What does that mean?
Yeah. So, there are books. It's probably more accurate to say that these books are lists of challenged books. In Florida, these decisions are made school district by school district. So, for example, if in Leon County they banned, I don't know, Pilgrim's Progress, it might be fine in Gadsden County. So when you say there's a list, well, all right, whose list is it? But it's interesting because districts are now required to report these books that are challenged to the state, and the state plans to create a list of those challenges. And you kind of think that's probably an effort to say, well, Gadsden County, did you think about this one? Maybe this isn't appropriate. So we may be moving towards a list.
Mm-hmm.
So that we'll have to see how that plays out.
Okay. So what happens now?
This is where the crystal ball is very cloudy. Everybody is waiting till January when this training is supposed to be available, and there should be some guidance. The state board has been talking about this. The Department of Education is holding rulemaking workshops, which are open to the public, and which you can register your concerns or your comments. You could also watch the state board. So we're waiting for guidance, we're waiting for state board rules, and then we're waiting to see how districts interpret those things. Because, I don't know the last time you read a guidance document, but if it were a map, you'd probably get lost. Mm-hmm. At the local level, folks should watch for rules in from their school boards. As a parent or a county resident, you absolutely have the right to know what's happening and to present your point of view. And just as a related note, I have seen a number of school districts that are working on changing their public comment rules at open meetings. So it looks like they're lightening up. Under COVID, they got pretty intense. And so you got like maybe a minute to talk, and now you might even have 3 minutes. Golly, it's crazy. There are some resources that I wanted to drop in the chat just about the whole issue, and then what the state is doing, and then also how folks can find out about the rulemaking workshops, which, is an interesting, way to find out what people are thinking about and talking about around these rules.
Okay. So it sounds like this may be a to be continued discussion. When we find out what happens in January, we might want to give you all an update. But I appreciate it, Cheryl. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we will have our next Know Your Child's Rights session very soon. Thank you.